On today's podcast, it's entitled Master of Darkness. And before we begin, I would urge you very much that if you have small kids, pets, or the elderly, I would usher them off to bed before we start because it's going to get a little dark. All pun intended. When you begin analyzing your photos, and I don't know if this is something people do, it's something I do, but when you start analyzing the photos, you start taking a look at the direction of the shadows, you start taking a look at the catch lights in the eyes, and you start trying to figure out, you know what is it about this photo that I really, really like? Maybe it's really soft light in the front, and you can see the background, you've got a mountain in the background, and it's all perfectly clear. It just, it looks gorgeous, it's very nice. So anyways, today, what I want to talk about is shadows and how I feel, and this is my personal opinion, so, please don't, comment down below and get upset with me, but my personal opinion is we as photographers, sometimes I think we focus too much on trying to light the subject correctly and we neglect the shadows, because I think it's the shadows that actually create, in my mind, it's the shadows that kind of create the emotion. It's the shadows that kind of create the mood. So first of all, in the first example, in this first photo here, one of my friends, I asked her if she would model for me, and she gladly, yeah, sure, no problem. So we ended up going down to Vancouver, and I believe the photo shoot was like 3 or 4 hours, and we started in downtown Vancouver, and then we ended up at the beach, and I'll kind of post pictures in between. But one of the photos I want to talk to you guys about is in the very first set that we did. We were at this, I believe there's a hair salon over there in a huge brick building. Well, this was the brick building that was next to it. I believe it was abandoned, and I shouldn't say believe, it was abandoned. There's signs and stuff everywhere, but we were in this little nook, and inside the nook there was like vines and stuff hanging on the side, and there was trash all over. It literally looked like it was a homeless person's haven. I know that sounds bad, but it's the truth. So we get in there, and immediately the very first thing I start doing is kind of clearing stuff off the ground, and I get her positioned, and I'm looking around because I noticed we just had this beam of light just coming, just like shooting directly into where we were at. I couldn't have asked for it. It was brilliant. And I start looking around, I look up, and there's a billboard behind us. Not directly behind us, but like, 40, 50 feet away. But the way it was positioned, the way the sun was at, it was just beaming a huge beam of light directly to right where we were at. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to use this. I'm going to make this work. So I actually set up lights, and I kind of positioned my lights. I used them in a little bit different manner, but I used that beam of light to really highlight one side of her face. But in doing so, I was positioning her. I kept positioning her side to side, making sure I got the catch lights in her eyes. And then at that point is when I started dialing down my settings on my camera so I can make sure I'm getting plenty of shadows on one side of her face. Even though this is more of a quote-unquote magazine type shot, I wanted to make sure that her face was very, very clean. I had beautiful shadows coming across, very elegant, very, very natural looking type shadows. We were out in the middle of the day, so had we been out in the full-on sun and I positioned her, what would end up happening was we would have really hard light here and a really deep shadow on this side. And yes, you know what? That for some photographers, they may want that look for a particular time. For me, at that moment, that is not the look I was going for. I was going more for kind of an elegant look. A very, very, I call them my lifestyle type portraits. You get all dolled up and we have a great time doing photos. I marked a spot on the ground. I forget, I either did it with some leaves or just some twigs that were on the ground. And I marked a spot there and I'm like, hey, do me a favor. You can move around, you can dance, you can twirl, you can do whatever you want. Just kind of keep your feet in the same spot. This way, I at least know how the light's going to be affecting her face. So she did that, and she was brilliant at it. I mean, she completely rocked it. I got that light just right in her eyes. I ended up putting a hair light up on top to just kind of kiss the top of her head. We use it as a hair light. Well, I just wanted ever so subtle, just boom, right there on the back. I got like highlights in her hair. It was great. One of the things I was being very cognizant about was the catch light. where the light that was coming down, where it was catching into her eyes. And from that point where it was catching into her eyes, the next thing I was looking for was shadows that were coming across her face. Were the shadows deep? Were they real thin? Was I getting weird shadows? Because I had a separate light that I was shooting at the same time. So at one point, when I had turned her a certain way, the light that was coming one direction plus the light that I was shooting here, I was getting shadows that were like double shadows that were showing up on the wall. And so I immediately, once I caught that, I was like, okay, I got to switch this up a little bit. So that's when I positioned up the hair light up just up a little bit higher than normal. It's not going to be too perceptible in the pictures. I didn't want it to be overbearing. When she'd move her body, I could see shadows. I could see her shadow fall up on the wall behind her, on the brick wall. At that point, what I would end up doing is I'd stick a little light down below. You can't see it, but I would put it down below just to fire off so you wouldn't see that shadow. It would just look real natural against the brick wall. So then when we get into the editing part of this, I took out any blemishes that I could. That didn't make her face look too odd, and brought the photo back into my software that I'm using into Capture One. And from there, I actually wanted to work on the background before I started on her. So one of the techniques that I've mentioned in previous podcasts is dodging and burning, and it's something that I can't stress to people enough. Essentially all you're doing is lighting and darkening. So what I ended up doing, I added a vignette, which kind of darkened all the photo and brings your eye to the center of the photo where she's at. And then I went with a little paintbrush, I went in and kind of highlighted all the spots that were already dark along the brick building behind her, and I made them a little bit darker. All the spots that were a little bit lighter, I made them a little bit lighter. That right there causes a little bit of contrast. And then I think there was a little bit of graffiti. Yeah, there was a little bit of graffiti that was behind her. I just highlighted some of that and brought out the color in that as well. So the next step that I go through in my editing process is just keep in mind all those things that I did them in separate layers. When I imported the image back into it, I basically just dropped those layers on top of the photo that I had, and boom, they're there, ready to go. The next thing that I did was I wanted to create shadows on her face. Yes, the lighting was perfect at the shoot. However, I wanted to increase some of the shadows that were already present. On the side of her face, I darkened up one half of her face just ever so slightly down kind of towards her shoulder. And then from that point on, you're not going to be able to tell too much because I really went through with a fine-tooth comb, but I added a little bit of shadow down the side of her to kind of give it a little bit of contrast between her and the wall behind her. The wall behind her, then I highlighted it just a little bit more, or I increased the highlight behind her to show a little bit of contrast between her body and the wall. The funny thing with this photo is some people might actually start with a white balance. I did not do a white balance on this photo because her dress was kind of a creamy white, kind of like a milky, creamy, I don't know the name of it, or what you would call it, it was a creamy white. And once I did the white balance, I did it a couple ways. I did the auto white balance, then I actually went and used the card white balance. It just completely got rid of the white. It didn't look natural at all. It looked terrible actually. So I scratched that part of the white balance and I manually white balanced. From that point on, one of the things I like to do is I try to take all the color out of the photo, adjust it so where it's nice and level, and then I will increase all of the color, all the saturation back into the photo so it's nice and even. Once it's nice and even, then I will pull out the reds, then I'll pull out the yellows. Maybe I'll add a little bit of color to her hair, whatever. It's just shooting with Canon, that's one thing that I've noticed is that it just shoots more on the red side, more on the red or the oranges. They're just a lot stronger tones in Canon. And so I'm always having to dial those things back. From that point on, I then retouched her face. And what do I mean by retouched her face? I added more saturation to her lips, a little bit of color around the eyes, her cheeks. I made sure that the makeup, the way she had her makeup, was very evenly set. One thing you need to be cognizant of is the neckline. People will often, they will overdo the face and retouching the face. And then once you start scanning down the photo, you start looking at the neck, you're like, oh, you can tell that they retouched the face beautifully, but they forgot the neck, or like the neckline. So I start with the face and then I come down into the neck, make sure that the color is even from where I had it at. And a lot of times I'll do them at the same time. It's just one of those things that I do, but I will go through it and take a look at it again. From that point on, I adjusted my vignette to make sure that all the lighting is directly on her. I will increase the lighting, the overall lighting of the photo, and it almost adds like a small glow to her. It's a technique that's used in professional headshot retouching for portraits. Not necessarily for fashion. It's a different style of editing, but it's something that I found that kind of works for both. So, but anyways, with all this, I'm just kind of giving you a heads up on how I edited the photo. One of the things I was very cognizant of is where I had those shadows. What kind of mood was I trying to create? I was trying to go for more of the magazine type look, as opposed to I was going for more of like the magazine type look than your standard headshot or your standard senior portrait. And I wanted the light to be very elegant, but yet I wanted to have a real, very subtle and smoothness to it. I know it's kind of a weird way of putting it, but and I achieved it. I got it, and I got the look that I wanted. And actually, what I need to thank is the software that I used. I had taken this photo about a year ago, and I used my previous software, which was Lightroom. And even though it did a wonderful job, once I eventually switched over to Capture One, I edited the same photo, like I said, about a year ago, and I really didn't like it, so I kind of stuffed it away. I re-edited this photo a couple weeks ago, and I noticed that I had, after using the software for about a year, I found that I really had a lot of control of how I could adjust the lighting, adjust the color, and adjust everything on her face, including the shadows. It was crazy. So what I'm trying to stress to you guys is that yes, it's very important to get the lighting just right, but when you get the lighting just right, you really need to be looking for those shadows, because what kind of emotion are you trying to create with this? For me, like I mentioned before, I was going for more of an elegant look, more of a magazine cover style look, something that you would see on Vogue or something like that, something you'd see on a magazine cover. I wasn't going for the harsh light, I wasn't going for the harsh fashiony look, but I wasn't going for the senior portrait type look either. I was going for kind of in between. It's what I call my lifestyle type photos. So once again, my name is Josh Gutierrez. I'm with JK Life Photography, and this is the story behind the photograph. If you haven't already subscribed, I would highly recommend that you click the button down below so you can subscribe to our channel, and every time I have a new podcast up and going, you'll be the first to know about it. So anyways, you guys have a wonderful day.